You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Home Field Apparel.
Saw the games, physical basketball and I was at the games. You were not. You watched them on YouTube. Anyway. I saw the games. I watched the games at the time.
Well, we're here. I'm Bob Moats. Welcome to X's and Joe's, a podcast dedicated to decoding the winning formula in college basketball.
And I'm Mike Wiemuth, welcoming you to episode 41, College Basketball 2025-2026 Season Preview, IU and Others, New Faces and Expectations, recorded on the afternoon of Wednesday, October 22nd, 2025. So, Robert, just thinking, now that Indiana's a football school, it feels almost off topic to get deep into basketball talk now, but apparently the season is upon us and we should probably talk about it.
As our friends in Alabama can attest, you can be both and you should be both. That being said, we should start this with the big money conversation that this is that the last, I would say, 96 to 100 hours. When was the Cignetti money? That was last week, wasn't it? That they announced Cignetti's extension. Yeah, he beats Oregon and he gets a $3 million raise. That's per year. That's a pretty impressive feat. And it's really kind of, I guess, from my IU's perspective, I think we would all argue a no-brainer that it's an investment for the long term. Mm-hmm. You've taken Indiana University and in 18 months or so, gone from Indiana University football, which was being bowl eligible was the goal, to now being number 2 in the country. Yeah. Just behind your friends at Ohio State.
Yeah. The losingest college basketball or college football program in history.
In history.
Now number 2.
Now number 2 in the country. So yeah, you pay that miracle worker, pay that man his money, as they say, as was said, as was said. Was it John Malkovich who said that? And was it Rounders?
Yes.
Yeah. Rounders.
I won't do the bad quasi-Russian attempt. There's really good YouTubes about that where Matt Damon talks about Malkovich approaching him after saying that line, saying, I'm just not a very good actor, apparently.
Actually, you could probably hire him and he could go on staff at Illinois these days, right? Use that accent down, for fighting a line out. We'll get to that later. So yeah, the big money and I mean, you've got to, UCLA coming, they're coming in this weekend. At this point, IU pretty much controls its destiny getting to a Big Ten championship. Hopefully, or interestingly, could be against Ohio State, where you could see maybe a couple of matchups. Again, on the Back Home Network, we have a lot of great programming surrounding football. Crimson Cast, Big Red Carpet,
football weather.
Some amazing podcasts and amazing content surrounding football. Don't take our word for this football team. Listen to the actual experts. But we're enjoying the ride, to say the least.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think once the season is over, I think you and I will probably do some kind of podcast. I don't know. We'll try to get Galen or someone else to join us, but maybe an appreciation exercise. They kind of do that in psychology, when people have gone through trauma in their past. And once they kind of get out of it, they try to get people to focus on the fact that, okay, just appreciate the fact that you're no longer there. You're here now. And so maybe that will apply appropriately in sports, particularly, again, to the most losingest college football program in history and their fans.
I feel like there needs to be cake and sweater vests. That just sounds like one of those types of things that we get in. Yeah, that just kind of has that feel of that sort of motif. But speaking of big money, we are now in recruiting season in basketball. 24 hours ago, we were going through the different feelings towards what we used to call a whiff. Right. And I'm going to challenge the term. I'm going to challenge the utilization of the term whiff, because a whiff means that the kid said, I like their door meatloaf better than your door meatloaf. I'm going here.
Yeah.
Whereas this is, they're going to pay me $1 million more a year, X, or whatever the figure was. I mean, we're seeing that it's a public, it's pretty much out in public that the rumor is $3 million plus for a college basketball player, an 18-year-old kid to go to the Ohio State University.
Yeah.
This is not the same as when
named Anthony Thompson, by the way.
Named Anthony Thompson, not to be confused with the IU second place Heisman running back in 1989.
Yeah, well, you know what we have to do now. Once there is an elite 5-star recruit named Archie Griffith, we have to absolutely triple his pay to get him to come by you. That seems only fair at this point.
I think it's only fair. Right. We give a little less to Eddie George. We just a touch less. But actually, I have seen Archie Griffith's backyard. You know that.
Yeah, I heard about you sent the pictures. Those were
he lives on a par 5 right outside Columbus, Ohio. I guess he's head of their alumni association, or he does something. I don't know. He works for the university. I mean, I don't know how he's qualified to be. Is he a big name in Columbus, Ohio? Because when we had
slightly. Yes.
We had dinner there. I took a picture in front of his picture and a couple of his awards that he doesn't have room for in his house. But I think I might have actually shanked the ball into his backyard and tried not to hit out of it. But probably because he has security and dogs. But that would just be So Archie Griffith, this Anthony Thompson recruitment. I'll refer back to we were talking about this right before the show started, and I mean, I think you and I know why they did this. Mm-hmm. But I think the big thing for me is you're paying your head coach $2.5 million,
mm-hmm.
and now you've got to recruit a 5-star one and done. You basically have a player rental for a year at over 3.
Yeah.
Who picks up the check? Someone brought that up in the Discord. Hey, I wonder who's going to, I wonder who's going to pick up the check, or brought that up to one of us. Who just kind of, do you see how Diebler, how that's going to kind of work out? And I'm kind of thinking to myself, there's a little bit of this that just doesn't seem, it seems almost to be counterintuitive.
Yeah. I mean, again, this is sort of the psychology of the hot seat that unfortunately begins to kick in, is where you're just trying to get through this week, this month, or the next few months without just one more tick against you in terms of, just adding more heat to your seat. And losing Anthony Thompson, if you're Ohio State, would have been, as a PR matter, pretty devastating, just given all the sort of problems that they're facing currently. So I agree. It's one of those, does it make logical sense from a basketball standpoint to overpay for a 5-star freshman? Given, again, what we've talked about before is that 5-star freshmen are great in terms of their capacity and their ceiling. It just says as a matter of box plus minus win shares and all that kind of actually winning metrics, they don't really stack up nearly as well as, again, sweet spot kids or the kind of sweet spot high-end portal players you typically see. And
Dylan Harper. Oh, go ahead. I was just saying, Dylan Harper had a 9.0 plus BPM, right? Last year, I believe.
Yeah. I mean, every year there's about, every year is about 4 or 5, one and done 5 stars that really do kind of ball out. I mean, it's Cooper Flag, Canoopel, VJ Edgecombe, Derek Queen, those kind of players, those obviously, those kids really did perform experienced elite basketball players. Problem is the rest of them kind of were at 6 and below. So that's kind of the problem you kind of run into with them.
But even then, Dylan Harper's at a 9+ last year. So he really wasn't at Cooper Flag level.
Yeah.
But he also wasn't at, bust level at a 2.
Right.
And Ace Bailey, I think, was at a 4 or 5. Point is, they had these 2 high paid, well compensated, highly touted 5-star recruits, and Rutgers got worse.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's also just kind of the weird thing about the dynamics of a team.
Mm-hmm.
You have experienced players and you're adding this elite kid, and the number one, let's say the number one returning player of utilization from last year suddenly becomes the number 2 or 3 possibly. And he's giving it up to a kid that maybe has a higher turnover rate, as freshmen typically do, and all the other sort of attendant problems. So yeah, it is complicated. And I think, this kind of leads us also into the idea that I think you and I will be having a Moneyball conversation / podcast about how do you navigate the current world of recruiting, roster construction in an NIL world where you do have budgets and you do have to make decisions where we could get this kid. If we up our money, we could get this kid, but then we're probably sacrificing something on the other end. And yeah, you're right. It is kind of crazy, just like the salary, component of it from just a standpoint of the university. I mean, you said that Diebler earns what, $2.5 million, something like that?
2.5 million.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was looking this up. Ted Carter is the president of Ohio State University. He only earns $1 million, which puts him at basically the same salary band as the left tackle on the football team. So, I mean, he clearly has to up his game to be able to get up to at least the level of a 5-star freshman, in his job.
In the words of the great Babe Ruth, when he was informed he made more money than the president of the United States, who I believe was Hoover at the time. Was it Herbert Hoover? I think that was Hoover.
I think it was Hoover. Yeah.
I had a better year than he did. Anthony, and honestly, for Diebler, for the Ohio State University's intelligentsia and class of landed gentry, and the whole group that I was hitting golf balls into a few months ago when I was in Columbus. Guys, you better hope Anthony Thompson has a better year than the president, because the fallout from this. I mean, I'm just imagining a world where in the college football playoff, Ryan Day, or he finds a way to lose to Michigan, or he loses, let's say, to Indiana in a Big Ten title game, or loses in his first round at home, and immediately the message board goes DEFCON 1, where everyone's lighting up. Why are we paying a 5-star 18-year-old basketball player to save Diebler's sorry backside $3 million, and we're not putting an extra several million into the offensive line? Why don't we take that money and put it to our offensive line, our defensive line, a punter, whatever floats their boat at that moment? Because the public relations disaster of football not winning back-to-back or losing to Michigan, which I think in Ohio State world might just be equivalent. Yeah. Ask John Cooper, ask Ryan Day, who was, quote, on the hot seat 11 months ago when he lost to Michigan.
And then won a championship.
And saved his job another year. You're safe another year. You got that natty.
Yeah, you just have to win the Danner every year.
You just got to win it.
And that's the only way you save yourself.
You got to do one. Everything else doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You kind of go into this sort of mindset where it's like, this isn't bitterness as much as it's just like, it's good that we walked away.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the consensus, right, Mike, that we have on this one, that there comes a point where, hey, look, the foreign investment firm is offering 175% market rate for the Empire State Building. Do we let them take it?
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. And there's the budget constraints. And also, I will say this, and, this kind of goes to, your point about whiffing. The reason I would always, point out, the problems with, what a whiffing means for a team is that a whiff just doesn't mean that you're losing that kid and that, talent level on your roster. It also tends to be a sign that there's something wrong with your team if you keep doing it over and over again. There's something about the attractiveness of your coach and their system that is just not connecting with the kind of recruits you need to A, save the coach's job, and B, hopefully get them to, the championship levels that you're looking for. When you're losing a kid because of money, it doesn't quite have the same sort of, let's say, predictive value for later recruitments.
No,
because if the kid says, hey, I like your school, I like your system, but, they're just paying a little bit more, then it does sort of it kind of, let's say, waters down, I guess, sort of the impact for future recruitments in terms of its predictive value. So that's one thing I kind of was saying yesterday, that people that were either texting me or on the, on the message board somewhere is hey, well, what about this? What does this mean? It's well, it's just different now. It's not quite as clear cut as it used to be, where I could just put out the bingo card and like, we could all laugh about things. But yeah, speaking of that, we need to update the bingo card soon, because with this new NIL world and, and the compensation component, yeah, we really need to add those extra 7 squares to make it a 4x4 now.
I think we desperately do need to do that. That it's a thing. And before I will just close with this concept that that being a lemming and following the lemmings retirement plan is not good for you. So at the end of the day, if you are worried, well, why didn't IU just pony the money up? It's because as everybody else is running themselves off a cliff, maybe there's another way to do this. And I think what we found with football, and what we found with DeVries building the roster to begin with, that we're going to talk about after the break, we saw that difference. And we know that maybe the plan that IU is going to put in place is going to be a little more strategic than Spanky and the gift just tossing the money out the window, which was going through my head all day yesterday. So one thing that's not tossing money out your window is buying home field. Home Field Apparel, our title sponsor for the Back Home Network, who has vintage-esque lines of T-shirts, sweatshirts, hats, hoodies, jackets, and other apparel for colleges as well as other entities, is available at www.homefield.com. I'm wearing a Home Field sweatshirt right now.
Did you see the Bison Mafia stuff that they're coming out with?
Loving the Bison Mafia. Yes, I have seen the Bison Mafia line, and I think that's going to be in my purchasing future here in the very near future. So yeah, the Bison Mafia, yeah, that's up there right now on the site, and I think you'll be seeing more Bison garb as time goes on.
Yeah.
So check them out at. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mike. Yeah, go ahead.
I would remind people that Christmas is coming up, and it would be a good time to start getting some pre-orders in before the rush comes, because they are definitely, like, a lot of those items are definitely in high demand. So get your orders in soon.
Yeah, get them in and check them out. You can also check them out not just on the website www.homefieldapparel.com, but also Homefield at Tracks in Bloomington, right on Kirkwood. So Homefield Apparel, check them out.
So when we come back, we'll take a look at IU right after this break and how they constructed their roster for the first year of the Darian DeVries era. Coming up on X's and Joe's.
Nation, are you tired of the same old takes? Say hello to Crimson Cast, the podcast that actually knows IU sports. Hosted by Galen Clavio and Scott Caulfield, they serve up sharp analysis, real talk, and just enough sarcasm to keep things interesting. Game previews? Check. Instant reactions? Double check. History lessons that make even our losses worth remembering? You bet. So whether you're tailgating at Memorial Stadium, pacing around Assembly Hall, or just avoiding Purdue fans, Crimson Cast has you covered. Search Crimson Cast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, and join the conversation today.
Welcome back to X's and Joe's. I'm Mike Wiemuth, joined by Coach Bob Moats. So, Bob, we've been kind of like nibbling around the edges of talking about DeVries and this first year at IU. I mean, as he's been adding some recruits here and there. I mean, we did a whole like Lamar Wilkerson show with Galen like some months ago. So now we're kind of getting into the stage where we can do some real analysis of the team as a whole. So I guess, what are your sort of like first impressions about what is being built with this team, especially considering we have at least some game film now between the summer trip and now with the exhibition game they just played against Marion last week. So I'm curious, sort of like, where's your head going right now with where this team is shaping up?
So I think the first thing is, and I mean, I'll just parrot what literally everybody else has said that has seen this and talking, whether it's national voices, our voices, whomever, it's going to be different, and it is different. The shooting is, I think, the big differentiation in how they're getting shots, where they're getting them from, and how they're kind of getting to them. Check out our good friend Tony Adranya. He has his first IU film room out with some of the Marion stuff, where he talks a lot about some actions, especially short rolls into the lane. that they were utilizing out of pick and roll versus Marion that you expect to see more of. You're seeing a lot of programs running that because it's just, again, we used to say, okay, pick and roll, pick and pop, now pick and short roll. It definitely gets you a point of space. And I think that's one of the big differences that you see with this team than you saw with the last really, and we talked about the last 8 years, but even going into Crean, where there seems to be a wider lanes for scoring ability than the sort of very tight, very sort of almost regimented options that you had in the offense over the last, call it, decade at IU. And a lot of that comes down to just kind of how offense has evolved into that conceptual, the sort of conceptual principles of play versus, okay, we're going to run set 43 and this is what we expect to see in set 43. And this is definitely what you want to hit. Like there were definitely times where you would see, and this is even going back to Tom Crean, where you actually say, well, they're really trying to get this one player. They're trying to get Blackman a shot, or they're trying to get Jordan Poles a look, or they're trying to get Watford a look. Even going into the Trace Jackson Davis, Romeo Langford years at IU under Miller, and then under Woodson with the bigs in particular, whether it was Jackson Davis and Malik Renew, Omar Ballo, Khalil Ware. Or also just how they were kind of doing things with the guards. And you had designated almost like there were only one or two players that you would ever see kind of in pick and roll action, like taking a ball screen. You're not going to see this with this team. And I'm going to kind of show what I mean here. Do you have the screen share? Can I? Okay. Do we have my screen share up yet?
Yeah. Let me bring your stuff up there.
Well, let's do this one. Okay. Do you see this here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, on the spreadsheet, what you're seeing is the players. Basically, I got 7 of the players from IU that their prior year numbers taken from Synergy. And this is from Synergy. I'm going to type that at the bottom here just so in case someone sees it. Taken from Synergy. No, everybody else's.
So that is an addictive site.
That is highly. Yeah. And it's amazing. So what you're seeing here is you're seeing that looking at these players that IU has put on the roster, pick and roll point per possession. The median in the country on this is, I think, and this is with passes, I think like 0.88 points per possession. And remember that every 10th of a point you go up is every 10 possessions you get an additional point. And since pick and roll action is usually one of the best actions that you see, one of the most frequent actions you see, what you're seeing is you're seeing multiple players that were taking pick and roll or being the ball handler in pick and roll a significant portion of time.
Right.
I think what's important to realize is that Enright and Conaway are considered the lead guards, and Drake, and they're over 40%. Enright's at almost 70%. And if you look at Enright, as you look at Enright's numbers, he's not really good at finishing himself, but he's good at hitting the roller, or he's good at hitting the perimeter shooter. You look at Wilk, but then you go to Conaway, he's better at the rim, a little worse, but he really can't discern too much because he may have been on a worse shooting team on those level threes going out to the perimeter, but hitting those. So you see that these numbers are above the median in some respects, or at least if you're Enright, you're right at the median. The other four are above it. Yeah. You're seeing that you have multiple players that can be that can get additional points out of the pick and roll game. And it's not just your point guard. It's not just your driver. Yeah. And then you compare that to Trey Galloway, who was doing this 2/3 of the time at a lower than median rate. And it wasn't just with Galloway as much as it was on the way that, because you're talking, like I said, we were talking about these very narrow outcomes that they were looking out of their pick and roll game versus here where they're doing a lot of this off of the reads, like reacting to where the defense is positioning the tag, which is what's covering the roller or the screener, as well as what's covered, as well as the help deployment on the weak side. Ideally, you want that ball moving, and that ball screen allows it to happen. And you see with, again, all of these players, you're seeing that they're very effective at pick and roll game. More so, or at least as ball handlers, more so though than I would say that than you've seen in the past at IU. So that's one thing to kind of look at as we're kind of having the conversation right now, that IU fans can look forward to, that you're going to have multiple guys that can take a screen as well as multiple guys that can set a screen. Yeah. We've talked about, you can see inversion, which is basically, think about Connerway or Wilkerson setting a ball screen for Tucker DeVries.
Right.
Imagine this. You send, and you've seen snippets of this, where you send Wilkerson maybe on what's called ghost action, which basically means you fake the screen and relocate on the perimeter away, kind of, going from your spot to the next spot. So you kind of go there. And then all of a sudden, so you ghost that with Wilkerson where he's open on the perimeter, and then you bring Reed Bailey up to set a ball screen. And Reed Bailey then can either slip it, or he can just go into pick and roll or pick and short roll. Yeah. All of a sudden now, and you're doing all this for Tucker DeVries. Tucker DeVries is your ball handler. Mm-hmm. It's hard to defend. It's incredibly hard to defend. And I think that those are they got guys with translatable skills in doing this, because you see those guys. I think that ball handling and that shooting out of ball screens, but also just the shooting altogether, and their passing, all of these things together means that they have guys whose skills translate well from smaller schools or lower conferences to upper conferences.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think, you talk about like some of the different actions, especially like, screening actions. It's, that's probably the one thing that I noticed so far that is most, I guess, that at least stands out compared to what we've like seen the last, let's say, 8 to 10 years. Aside from the shooting, obviously, is to me just like the screens themselves. Like I would say that for DeVries, he's actually trying to turn the screener into a weapon again, which sounds kind of corny, but if you actually break down the film and like watch what they're doing now, the screen actions that I was doing now is completely different than what we saw under, let's say, Archie and Woody. I mean, the last 8 years, under Archie and Woody, they had some different actions that were kind of, effective in terms of setting screens. Archie was definitely more kind of like mover blocker kind of like concept. Woody was definitely more getting one guy the shot, getting Mackenzie Mbako, sending him on, let's say, like double staggers or floppy action to get him, a 15 or 18 foot elbow shot. The problem I always thought is that so many of the screens that we were saying before were very predictable and sort of like formulaic, where the roles were pretty well defined for the defender. Okay, this guy is doing the screening and this guy is doing the shooting. DeVries is actually kind of bringing screener deception back into center stage with what he's doing, with IU's offense. You saw so many times in, even what Tony was breaking down in his film room. Not only are the screeners setting the screens well, but what they're doing after the screen is interesting. They're bolting to open space. Which is what you want a screener to do. It's also not exactly clear whether when you're seeing an IU kid start to set a screen, whether he is actually the screener or the eventual shooter. You're seeing the one, I guess, comparison I make is to have fans watch UConn with Alex Caravan. Caravan, you have no idea what that kid's going to do when he's running in their offense. You'll see him going, it looks like, okay, man, he's flaring out. He looks like he's about to set a screen. No, he ghosts, and then he runs over to the corner to take a three. Or it looks like he's about to set a screen. Nope, he makes it a harsh cut, to the open space towards the basket and layup or, 2 free throws. Or he does set the screen. But then when he does flare out and, gets the shot. And I think that's kind of the interesting part of what you're seeing so far with DeVries is that it's far less clear now when you see IU kids setting screens what they're going to do compared to the past. I think Tony had a really good one where he highlighted where I think it was Enright was coming around into Reed Bailey's area. And he basically was using Bailey, I think, as, Bailey was basically setting screen. Enright was curling around. It looked like it was just a basic curl action. Instead of curling around towards the lane, Enright ran right straight into Bailey's man. Bailey pops back out and then basically takes the 3.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also, I think Tony mentioned that, and I saw it too, is that they finally ran page action at IU. I don't think I've seen that IU run that in at least a decade or more.
Yeah.
I think they did it once or twice with Yogi, in his last year, but I cannot remember IU doing that literally in 10 years. And in page action, for fans to know, it's basically just a rip screen where the screener runs to a dribble handoff, typically for a 3, usually at the top of the key. And I think and I saw at least once where they did run that for Lamar Wilkerson. So yeah, I mean, it's great for all that stuff. Obviously, is trying to set up better shots, more 3-pointers, and obviously in that Marion game, I was just raining 3-pointers, all night. I don't know if they're necessarily going to keep that pace up, but it would be kind of cool if they did. But at the very least, it's trying to basically tilt the numbers back in IU's favor in terms of the efficiency. We was talking about the math. Hey, 3-pointers, you score 3 points off of a 3 and only 2 points off of a 2, and you can sacrifice a little bit of accuracy for the fact that you're just going to get more points out of the shot. So it's
one reason.
Good.
It's one reason why those level 3 point per possession numbers are higher than others.
Right.
Because when you're getting a level 3 action, which level 3 is basically level 1 is the screener or the guy with the ball handler in the screen situation. Level 2 is the screener. Level 3 is everybody else. And more than likely, those level 3s are in spot up situations around the floor because still, even if you have a cutter coming through, coaches are going to take the cutter away before they take away the perimeter. Right. Not because they don't devalue the perimeter, but because they know they can recover faster on a perimeter closeout.
Right.
It's hard to recover off a cut straight to the basket, a 45 cut straight to the basket.
Yeah.
You at least have a fighting chance of getting a good closeout off of a kick out, off of a penetration to a 3.
Yeah. Yeah. And also from that, the interesting thing when you think about the roster construction is that an underrated, I guess, metric in the consideration of running that kind of offense is the fact that you just need good passers for it. Mm-hmm. You need guys that are accurate at passing. And I think I tweeted this summer at some point that IU in the last 15 years only had one player that had an assist rate north of 30%. And I think it was Xavier Johnson, 2 or 3 years ago. IU now has 2 kids on their roster now that are north of 30%. So again, one player in the last 15 years versus 2 kids now on the current roster in year 1. And that's, I think it's, Enright and Connerway, both are north of 30%. Mm-hmm. And there are other 2 kids that are right on their heels. Reed Bailey's around 25%. I think Jason Drake's right 23-24%. So you have multiple kids now on your roster that are upper tier passers that are efficient at their passing. And so I think, aside from the shooting facet, which obviously has improved, I think it's going to be just as interesting to see how this team passes. Are they hitting the shooting pocket more accurately than what we've seen, over the last few years? I think once you have more kids that are hitting more accurate passes, it does tweak the percentages of actual, the actual 3-point shooting percentage. You see it typically where if you just miss the shooting pocket just by a foot or so, then that drives the accuracy numbers down for the shot. So I think that's the kind of thing that at least you can see in the numbers. There's a very clear intentionality, but behind what Darian DeVries is trying to do in terms of updating the offense.
Really, the pass happens before the pass is ever thrown. The pass doesn't happen when the pass is thrown. One reason why you had bad passers, you had guys who were thinking the game too much. One reason why you had bad passers was you had passers who were trying to file a programmatic way of playing basketball, a hierarchical way of basketball, like you were talking about with some of the actions going to, trying to get Mackenzie Mbako off stagger action. And they would throw some twists in and do some other things, but it was still very set oriented.
Yeah.
Or you would watch what happened with Romeo Langford in the corner for a season under Archie Miller. Mm-hmm. Even some of the stuff under Crean, when it wasn't working, you would have that sort of almost overly programmatic, and the ball would get stuck, and then the passing just wasn't where it should have been in those types of situations.
Yeah.
The pass happens before you throw it because the pass is dictated by how the defense is responding. I don't know if Darian DeVries is as structured on off ball as Dan Hurley. Dan Hurley, everything he runs is incredibly well designed. He has a bunch of concepts out of different formations, right. Whether it's baseline out of bounds, whether it's a horns, or whether it's a 5 out, whether it's another type of floppy, whatever he's running out of at that point, transition. He has several alignments that he uses, and he has a bunch of sets that he has designed out of those alignments to basically do different things. So he has basically a playbook that goes in a high number with different combinations.
Right.
And he takes the thinking and the reading out of the guy away from the ball. Does that make sense? So the off-ball guys aren't doing a lot of these sort of decision-making. They're going to areas. So those actions you see Caravan running, it's basically called from the bench. It was designed on the whiteboards. The ball handler, though, has amazing amounts of freedom. So the question is, do you have a situation here where you have ball handlers with freedom and they have a better feel? You can do it conceptually, where you don't have to be as structured as Hurley is off ball if you just follow certain principles. Yeah. But a lot of those principles that you're seeing right now that are in play, it's a question as we get further in the season, we'll have a better idea of how that's being run, why it's being run, and what exactly he's doing. But and against Marion, you didn't see a whole lot of structured stuff anyway, because it's an exhibition. You're going to see same thing against Baylor, same thing in the first game of the season. They're going to be able to win it with conceptual. You may start seeing a little more of the structured stuff by Marquette. Mm-hmm. You're going to see maybe more of that for the Marquette game. But at this point, it's a question, and that's especially with softening actions trying to get the defense pulled up. But what you're seeing with that more is DeVries has you have the right ideas and the concepts in place, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. A lot of what you're seeing in that pass is thrown because as the defense is moving to contain the ball, or to stop cutters or the roll man and pick and roll action, because those are your high value. I'm going to put this up on the screen share real quick, if that's okay. There's another one I put up here. It's give me just a second. I'll kind of explain this. So you'll see this one now, where what you see with Drake is what the median on like a spot up is, and that Drake did better than the median in just about every area in DeVries' last season.
This one?
I believe so. Yeah. Okay. No, the next one. I'm sorry. Let me do this one. Let me load this one up.
Yeah, I'm not seeing that one. Sorry.
I got it now. Okay, let's try this one. CB play results. Is that up? Basically, I can tell you this.
Yeah, it's not up here on mine, but yeah, good to explain it though.
But DeVries, I just explained. My explanation was they were above points per. Yeah, they were above PPP on the median on almost every area of offense, whether it was pick and roll action, whether it was ISO action, whether it was transition, whether it was spot up shooting, whatever it is. You're talking about a 10th percentage point up because he was running such efficient offense and effective offense at Drake. You're seeing the similar types of concepts being employed at IU with players who we think, and that's I think the question we kind of go into is highly experienced players. That's the other part. One area where you can run this well is you have experienced players, other than maybe Trent Sisley, who's a freshman, but looks like his year at Mount Verde and his years playing in Indiana have put him into that position. He's able to make the right read. He's able to do the correct thing, see where the defense is going. As I tell my kids all the time on this, when you're doing this type of offense, is a lot like RPO, like we see in football.
Yeah,
the movements aren't as complicated as they used to be when you start drawing up stuff on a whiteboard. But what is complicated is knowing when to hit the pass based on where the defense is, how the defense is trying to stop you.
Right.
If that makes sense to everybody. Hopefully that wasn't too roundabout, but I think it's really important to kind of evaluate that. And Mike, it kind of goes back to what you're seeing there as well, and also what you saw in the Marion game and on some of the stuff about Puerto Rico. But that experience factor kind of points back to what you've talked about for years, which is how do you build a winner?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, obviously, it is different than the past where typically like a year one coach, is, let's say like even go like the Tom Crean era, like, when Crean had to basically, start from the very beginning. Yeah, you kind of had to endure like the early Verdell Jones, Jordan Holes freshman and sophomore years as they kind of grew into their roles and like, get experience. Now with the portal, obviously that's just like all out the door. Now you can basically build a ready to go roster year one and just, hit the ground running. And yeah, I think that the experience part is obviously, that's manifest. It's, it's obviously just better to build with more experienced guys than freshmen. The other part, I guess, that's maybe a little bit more unique is the fact that some of the experience also happens like within the team and between the team and the coach. You have experience of, let's say, two players that played together at North Florida and Harrison Miles. You also have the experience of the coach and the son, and then an ex-teammate at Drake playing together. So that's like another unique sort of like, bond. And those kind of things is, as fans, we may not pay as much attention to that, but that's something that I think that, most coaches will probably tell you, yeah, that's kind of a big deal. I mean, there's definitely something about the fact that, like the coach has not just the fact that it's his son, but also the fact that is kind of the guy he's been relying on now at his third college in the last, 4 years. And it's, and yeah, I mean, just having seen that, I will say this is kind of funny being a Terre Haute person and being, around ISU people. Indiana State people will remember quite vividly the championship game of the Missouri Valley Conference. I guess was like 2 years ago now.
2 years ago.
Where basically ISU and Drake had essentially the same numbers across the board in terms of the box score and in terms of team stats. Everything was constant except one variable is that Connor Enright and Tucker DeVries were combined 7 for 9 from 3-point line. And ISU as a team was 7 for 24 from 3-point line. And that was basically the ball game. So it's been funny, like, talking to ISU, Terre Haute IU people that are also kind of follow ISU. It's like, oh, who are some of these new players? It's like, well, you remember like when you're really angry and, throwing your glasses around at the ballyhoo because ISU was losing that championship game? Well, actually, the two guys that are most responsible for it and their coach is now are going to be at IU. so yeah, it's I mean, it's the experience. It's the sort of the commonality of like, having played together and kind of grown up together for, like literally two different sets of people, on this roster. So yeah, it's going to be different and it's going to be, I think compared to maybe sort of like rebuilds of the past, it's going to be a little bit more unique in that, yeah, you might be able to hit the ground running a little bit faster than maybe what we've been used to.
It's funny you were mentioning all that because I was just thinking of an adage that I say that, basketball is an easy game, kids. It's who puts the orange thing through the orange thing more times than the other guy, that's who wins and the other guy loses. Yeah. All the rest is just details. And ultimately what you want is a shot making game. Like, unless you can physically or schematically dominate your opponent, it comes down to shot making. And that's and you get shot makers, you're going to do that. And both teams had shot makers. One group was hitting, the other group wasn't. And it was actually, it's a hell of a game to watch if you haven't watched it. We recommend to anybody, if you get a chance to hop it on YouTube, do so.
Yeah.
Which kind of leads to the next part of this with skill set transitions. And, as I kind of went through this whole thing of, it's kind of like, the beginning of Major League of who are these guys? Who are these people? Did we get the, and it's not as bad as getting the coach from the tire store. But when you kind of think of this concept of, these new guys coming in, not really knowing much, we talk a little about the offense and how impressed we are with that. And then everyone's anxieties over the defense. When I say everyone's, you listen to the national narrative and the concern over, well, can the bigs match up with Big Ten bigs?
Mm-hmm.
The question is, do Big Ten bigs match up with our bigs? That's another part of the equation. Because with Reed Bailey, you got a guy who can put the ball on the deck and attack. You have a guy that can do a lot that basically can take care of some immobile bigs. We'll talk about that with, as we talk about more Big Ten programs. But the other part of this is you also have a team and a coach with Darian DeVries that a year ago, their defense was much better at West Virginia than their offense.
Right.
Analytically. It was a top 20 defense, right, Mike?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I checked Ken Palm, but I think it was definitely up there.
Yeah. And I mean, And so when you think about last season with DeVries, with an undermanned group nearly getting the tournament without his son and without a couple of, at least another player that was a big offensive threat for them. Defensively, I think they're going to find a way to schematically be able to handle most of this. And I think you can see the way that they communicate is critical. The way that everybody is responsible for their assignments. I think the days are gone where we're looking at over-reliance on help would be my thing.
Yeah.
Any sort of pack line concept or nail slot run concept was basically trying to go to ball handler into help defense, which can be very difficult if your player doesn't recover into the help, which we saw countless times really over the last keep going well before even Archie Miller. Was it defensive issues and kind of over reliance on help side defense? Under Woodson, it was over reliance on rim protection. With Archie, it was over reliance on trying to close off gaps, and the gap issue, which we guys were just trying to, keep teams moving left to right and then getting picked apart because they couldn't recover quickly on the perimeter to stop 3-point shooting.
Yeah.
All of those things. You now have a team, though, that the way that they're going to defend, I think, is they're going to be very responsive. They're still going to be in gaps, but they're going to be more denial, and they're going to be more disruptive on the defensive end.
Yeah.
Versus they're going to be jumping into lanes more versus just kind of sacrificing the passing lane just to keep a body there to prevent a dribbler from going at you.
Yeah. I don't know if you've seen on some of the video, Bob. It definitely looks like there are times, at least especially in the West Virginia video files I saw, that there's a kind of sense of goading turnovers, like basically like literally like trying to like create the idea that, okay, no, this one guy is open, and then basically it's jumped. I saw that a lot, I think, it's actually one of the first games of the year last year for West Virginia, which is this probably maybe where the Darian DeVries to IU momentum actually started, which was that holiday tournament in the island.
Right.
West Virginia took on Gonzaga and won in game one, which was just before IU lost to Louisville, or I think it was like other way around. It's basically the same morning set. Tucker DeVries. It looks like the way his dad used him was almost like a free safety. There are many times where it looks like, okay, you basically like overcommit to denying passing lanes, but you kind of like leave almost like one guy semi kind of quasi open, and then you basically like over challenge that once the ball's in the air. And so you see other teams kind of do the same thing, but it's not something that IU's done in a while, where like literally there's a kind of intentionality around getting specific turnovers in specific scenarios versus we'll just play them hard, or just, like you said, kind of filter them to a certain part of the court and just hope that they're not able to reverse the ball and get open shots, which again, I think it's going to be a little bit eye-opening for IU fans to see the change, not just on the offensive end, but the defensive end is definitely going to be just as interesting.
One thing that is going to be intolerable here is they're going to mitigate the amount of time they put two on the ball. They're going to mitigate the amount of time that they actually have with someone with, let's say, a big and help trying to just stay on the ball too long while the other guy is just kind of not fighting through the screen as effectively as they should. I don't think that's acceptable in a Darian DeVries defense, which is actually allows a guy like a Tucker DeVries to kind of be in that position on the help line. One of the things about watching his teams, watch the guys on the help line, watch the guys on the weak side, watch the guys on that, what you call the second level of help, basically, which is you have the ball on one side, then you have the help side on the other, basically the guys who are, one level, one group behind the front line.
Yeah.
Watch where they're positioned. It's not just they're standing there watching the ball. Like you would see that in a lot of pack line systems. You saw it a lot under Mike Woodson, where you would have literally 5 guys all angled towards the basketball. That's what they were watching, was the ball.
Yeah.
What they're doing here is, you have more of that swivel, and you have that physical moving where it's like that individual player is now understanding the pass. Is not just taking away space inside the lane for a penetration, but also taking away a passing lane, disrupting a passing lane, which subtly moves a guy off of his spot.
Yeah.
See, if your help is fixed, if everything's fixed, then this guy can kind of go to their spots and they can readjust their angles and get the passing angle. But if the help is shifting to take that angle away, you're moving that shooter, you're moving that weak side guy, that level 3 guy, you're forcing him to really have to be uncomfortable. And so now you're throwing the timing of the offense off, which goes back to your point where you're talking about hitting the shot pocket, having good time passes. A lot of that comes down to, if you're moving and you're basically disrupting the flow of the offense, it's harder to throw pinpoint passes if they're being disrupted.
Right.
So, and that also means that you can close out quicker to those areas. And I mean, I'll just kind of finish with this. I showed this to you yesterday with some slides. And I should have done it for this, but we'll do it later. Anyway, first possession of Drake versus Washington State.
Yeah.
Oscar Clough, who's now going to Purdue, was the big.
Yeah.
And the first possession, they basically, DeVries got caught in zoom action on his assignment, switched to Clough, giving up 3-4 inches to this big kid. And what DeVries did was, first, when they switched it, his assignment, the Drake bigs on his assignment, closes that off. He's able to disrupt the passing lane so he can't get a dive. He's able to prevent the post feed through a 3/4 then a front. And then at the end of it, when the ball reverses back to his assignment and the big is back out there, defensively covering his original assignment, DeVries is able to shield him off of the boards to allow their 3 to get Overton to get the ball and get it in transition.
Yeah.
The point is, people who are worried that the Big Ten bigs are going to cause problems for IU, yeah, they might. But I do think that schematically you're going to have enough where they're going to be able to be just better on – they're going to be better on more possessions to be able to stop certain things that will in some ways mitigate the fact that they don't have the same type of bulk that other Big Ten teams have.
And also, like you said, because they're doing more disruptive actions and because they're less predictable, not just on offense, but especially on defense, it's going to be less predictable exactly like where you're going to get your shots and set up for your offensive rebounding, angles. So it's, the just the idea of things being less predictable and being more disruptive is going to throw some monkey wrenches, I guess, in the and maybe some of the advantages that people are assuming about other Big Ten teams versus IU and their bigs. So that's a very good point. So when we come back, we will talk about the rest of college basketball. Taking a look at some of the, let's say, the returning teams that we think may be competing for championships, but a special focus on some of our Big Ten brethren and some of the additions that they've made to their rosters. Next on X's and Joe's.
Nation, are you tired of the same old takes? Say hello to Crimson Cast, the podcast that actually knows IU sports. Hosted by Galen Clavio and Scott Caulfield, they serve up sharp analysis, real talk, and just enough sarcasm to keep things interesting. Game previews? Check. Instant reactions? Double check. History lessons that make even our losses worth remembering? You bet. So whether you're tailgating at Memorial Stadium, pacing around Assembly Hall, or just avoiding Purdue fans, Crimson Cast has you covered. Search Crimson Cast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, and join the conversation today.
Welcome back to X's and Joe's. I'm Bob Moats with my good friend Mike Wiemuth, and we're talking about the upcoming college basketball season after we just did a fairly deep dive on Indiana. I think that was pretty – would you qualify that as a deep dive?
Well, yeah. I mean, for the 20, 25 minutes we did, we could – again, you and I, if we get together at the Brian Burley, we could go about 3 hours. But
basically two and a half cigars. In my case, 2 cigars. In your case, probably 3 because I smoke the really fat ones these days. Those big 60 gauge jobs. Yeah. But we could definitely do that for 3 and still have a lot of room to talk. Yeah. But I think when you go back to kind of the major league mindset of things, and it's like you see the manager in there with the owner showgirl going, "Oh, we're gonna put the whole thing together." Old Lou's up there putting the whole thing together, and how they're putting it all together. We just gotta, we got some potential all-stars on this group, and you're seeing a lot of programs right now. It's Christmas. Everyone's getting a Sky Striker for Christmas. It's all sitting under the tree. Doesn't matter that the thing's on rain check and back order. Every 9-year-old kid, aka college basketball fan, is ready to get their dream toy. The Sky Striker and the AT-AT are there. You have the kind of the hope here, and I think part of this, Mike, as we've kind of talked about this earlier, we talk about predictability. Predictability also works when you start doing the analytics, because I think one main advantage that Purdue especially has coming into this year is that they're incredibly stable from a standpoint of who's coming back, who they brought in, who left. I do think Cam Heide leaving is a problem for them. I really think Cam Heide leaving is an issue. I think that...
What is your explanation for that?
Because one, I think that if you're talking about Cam Heide versus, let's say, Oscar Clough or Daniel Jacobson, you're now moving Kaufman-Renn away from a small ball post.
Right.
And now more as a small ball post playing big wing.
Yeah.
And now you have less space with Clough or Jacobson down there, or vice versa. It depends on which one you're going to send screening.
Yeah.
But I think Purdue's issue was never really, is more how can you better dribble penetrate the basketball versus using passing penetration into the post or into level 2 actions, which they're so really good at. Remember, so you go back to kind of why you take away the roller on pick and roll, why you take away the screener or the big man. The reason you take that away going to the basket is usually they get a mismatch of some sort and they get an easier shot, or they get a dunk. And coaches love layups and dunks, wide open layups and slam dunks. Yeah. Wide open 3-pointers from the corner are next. Yeah. But if you're looking at this from a perspective of a coach scouting Purdue, you have to cover Braden Smith off a ball screen. You're gonna they then oftentimes either roll Kaufman-Renn into the post or into a short roll into the lane or what have you.
Yeah.
And now how do you tag that? Because your problem with tagging it is who's out on the other side. And the one thing you can't do, it's kind of like throwing hanging curveballs to Ted Williams. You just don't do it.
Yeah, yeah.
And so now it's almost a thing where you look at the analytics. It's almost like the best way to defend Purdue is, okay, let Braden Smith just go to the rim and contest it.
Yeah. Or let him shoot those like 15-foot stop turnarounds and such. So
I'd argue that him going into the lane and trying to shoot a layup is better than even the 15-footer. I'm more scared. I'm more afraid for the 15-footer if I'm defending him than I am him going to the ring, shooting that. Because oftentimes when you look at pick and roll numbers and you look at kind of ball handler pick and roll numbers, a medium ball handler pick and roll is basically ball handler pick and roll is
you got the number.
The median on that is it's basically 0.803 points per possession.
Yeah.
So for that level 1, that roll guys at over 1 spot ups are usually at 0.955.
Yeah.
So Braden Smith, because of his size, and again, I'm not talking about giving him open layups, I'm saying contested layups.
Yeah.
Let him go ahead and penetrate it a little deeper, take the roll man away more, and then really focus on and then make that angle pass to Lawyer harder to make.
Yeah.
That would be, but that's where Purdue, again, I'm kind of saying from a tactical standpoint, how do you disrupt Purdue? You force Smith to go deeper because you put him at 15, you may still have Lawyer coming off some sort of pin action or some sort of UCLA action where you can get him a ball.
Yeah.
Same with Harris, same with Cox, same with Benter. Whoever they're going to throw out there, they're going to throw out there. Whoever they have out there, they can kill you with that 3-point shot off the weak side.
Yeah.
He will counter scheme you. He's really good at that. Painter's a genius at it.
Yeah.
But that would be my argument as to kind of how you handle those areas. Also knowing full well you can't leave Jacobson or Clough off of that help too much because they're very effective at, just maybe off those dives, dinks, dunks, whatever you want to call it, kind of coming in the lane.
Offensive rebounds with Clough and all that. Yeah.
And that's your issue. That would be your issue with giving Smith that layup is that you may see more of those issues. So you got to make sure you're cracking back onto the big, shielding it from there.
You got so much practice doing that with Edie. I remember like the last year they were together, that was kind of the big change. They went from just dumping into Edie to doing all those like screen actions, getting Braden basically playing like option quarterback. Okay, do I just like lay it up soft off the rim, which is kind of like an intentional miss, which effectively is like an alley-oop to Edie.
Right.
Or do I kick a corner to Fletcher for an open three? That was kind of like the offense for Purdue that last year together. Yeah, I think I agree with all that. I'm also kind of curious. So the big additions they had is Oscar Clough from South Dakota State. Like what 6'10", 6'11". But he looks like he's about 35 years old. Just he's literally a man. He is a man. That guy is very impressive in terms of just his physical capabilities, and he also just very skilled at blocking out, and has one of the best rebounding metric lines in the country. Also, the other one they added that I think it's interesting is Omer Mayer, the Israeli Braden Smith, or the chosen Braden Smith, let's say.
You love him. You love that guy.
IU fans are going to be very jealous that Purdue got Omer Mayer. That kid is really impressive. Now, again, I've seen him a lot, in FIBA games, like Israel's games against, this last summer. I mean, he was very impressive. Great passer, but also very impressive shooter from deep. So, yeah, I'm curious. Like, let's say Omer Mayer kind of blows up. Where do you put him? He's kind of a point guard-ish, but then you have Braden Smith, who's like literally maybe the best point guard in the country.
He is. He is.
Do you take Cox out? You put Mayer in there. You have a double point guard, but then you have like two guys that are not necessarily like the fastest but they're crazy. They're crazy in terms of their upper tier skills. And again, also you have Clough. Then okay, where does Clough and Jacobson operate together? Probably not. One has to be in there. The other one has to be sitting down. But then now you have TKR, Trey Kaufman-Renn, who is great. Last year is basically, like you said, a small ball 5 in a way. Now he goes back to the 4, and Purdue is probably really good at rebounding in that setup, but also they're slower. And that's kind of been my observation about Purdue this year. I think they're going to be much more skilled. I think they'll be much better rebounding this year, but I think they're actually going to be slower than they were last year. And last year, being slow was kind of a problem for them.
So you may have just answered my question. You just answered the question I was going to have: is how do they pump up their ceiling? And it's through offensive rebounding, is what it really sounds like.
They
go from it, because I want to look at something.
Killed last year because TKR was just like having to do a lot of work all by himself. And again, he's like, he's good for like a 6'8", whatever he is, kind of like a traditional 4, but like putting him in a 5 in the Big Ten against like some teams that had 2 bigs against, his by himself. I think the Purdue like kind of suffered a little bit on their, of course, it's hard to compare since like the last 2 years they had Zach Edey in there, who was just one man rebounding colossus. So,
well, and Purdue's problems. So here's a couple things to keep in mind. They finished the year 14th in Ken Pom. They actually finished as a 4 seed, losing to Houston on the last second based on that out bounds play.
Yeah.
So another reason why people are excited about Purdue. They had a good result to their season, although their adjusted efficiency looks very similar at the beginning of this year as it did at the end of last year.
Yeah.
You could see some growth. They were not as good of a rebounding team offensively last year as they were with Zach Edey. That's kind of like, and on that point, Mr. Obvious, tell me what else I don't know.
Yeah.
But the other problem, I think, is defensively, they took a step back because they still don't have the same rim protection. And the question is, can Jacobson walk into that position and do that? Could Clough be more effective in those? Quite possibly. But there's a difference between a basically a freshman Daniel Jacobson and a junior or senior Zach Edey.
Yeah.
They're not the same guys, is what I'm trying to say.
Zach Edey as a sophomore and freshman was the same as a junior.
Zach Edey. Yeah. Exactly. So with Purdue, I mean, I can see why people have them at number one. I can see why you vote for them because they're a predictable decision. I would say they're definitely in the top 5% of college basketball. Yeah. I would agree, top 2% definitely, but I think they could end up in the top 5% and still have a good season. They can still make waves in the tournament. I'm not sure about their ceiling, honestly, because I don't know if they're going to be more effective at penetrating the basketball, which I think is their biggest weakness.
Yeah. They're one of those.
Other than Braden Smith, and you can scheme. You have to have multiple penetrators. I only see one penetrator on that team, unless Cox and Harris take a step up.
Yeah. I would say Purdue has the highest floor of any team in the country. I just not sure, but I'm skeptical that there aren't 5 or 6 other teams in college basketball that have a higher ceiling, which will matter more in March. But I still think they're going to have a 30-win kind of season anyway.
So that being said, speaking of 30-win seasons, we have Houston, last year's national runner-up, and they definitely had some upgrades.
Yeah,
they got a little better. What did you say?
Well, yeah. Well, here's the thing. Like, do you think that so Houston? What they're returning Uzan and Sharp and Tugler. So that's 3 of the biggest pieces they had on their runner-up team last year. But the weirdest thing that they have going is that they actually added 3 5-star recruits this last year.
Right.
Harrell, Fleming, and Sinek. Think about Kelvin Sampson's history of 5-star recruiting.
Eric Gordon.
Well, yeah. Well, they said Jarris Walker was it 2 years ago. Was the last one, and the one prior to that was Eric Gordon. So you had this. What was that? Will it be like? So in the course of 17 years, well, actually, even before Gordon, he didn't have a lot at Oklahoma. I mean, he had a lot, like EB and a lot of those kids were JUCOs. So you almost have a 2-decade period where he has 2 5-star recruits, and now in one season he signs 3.
Yeah,
I'm curious if he's going to have I won't say quite the same category as what Rutgers went through this year, but if he'll have a little bit of a Rutgers regression if he's making this kind of trade-off between talent and experience.
I will say this about Kelvin Sampson. The guy's a ball coach flat out. That's not a knock on Peichel out at Rutgers. It's just there's a significant differentiation in what Sampson. Think about what Kelvin Sampson did with the program at IU in the 2 years he was here.
Yeah.
And think about where that second year team with Eric Gordon was. I think if he got the right guys, if he got the right fits for him.
Yeah.
Sampson's good at motivating his players. He's good at getting his players to do what he needs them to do. The real thing for him is getting offense or getting the defense the way he wants it, which is that ability to basically trap out of stuff where you're utilizing your ball screen defense is more aggressive than anybody's in the country, where you're basically driving the ball handlers into not just the bench, you're trying to put them into the 7th row.
Yeah.
So if he can get those guys defending at that level, then he may have a little more offensive firepower to be able to pull it off. Well, basically, Sampson's problem is the opposite of Purdue's.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's he's going to defensively be able to. It's just a question of are they going to be able to schematically do what they want him to do with the age, with the differences in age, with that sort of experience level and the differences in age that he has.
Yeah, they have Tugler coming back, which I think he may be the most important. I mean, I think Sharp is probably overall the better player, but Tugler might be more valuable just in the fact that he is the center and he is the Big 12 returning defensive player of the year. I think that's going to help anchor a lot of things for, even if they do have some slippage with, let's say they start Harwell and Sinek at the 2 and the 4. I think having Tugler there is going to make up for maybe some little freshman errors here and there. So
I think so too. Yeah. But again, it's rightfully putting him in the top 2%. They were returning enough pieces. They've added some pieces. I think their additions are better than Purdue's, honestly.
Correct. Yeah. I mean,
and that's again obvious statement.
Yeah. Well, again, as much as I like Omer Mayer, and I think Mayer may be an NBA player, I think the 3 kids that Houston added will be playing in the NBA.
I think you're right.
I know Senak is already like listed as possibly a top 10, and Harwell will probably be like a first rounder as well. So I know, I think Kingston Fleming, I don't know if he's in the 5-star range. I don't know if they have him playing as much as the other 2, but I think he will probably be an NBA player at some point. So
it was interesting watching Sampson kind of make the change to the Big 12, by the way, that he's done it incredibly effectively. That I think one of the concerns I had when they were moving into the Big 12 a couple of years ago was, well, okay, he's no longer in, was it the American they were in before? Or it was American.
Yeah, well, I think it's Conference USA, right?
Conference USA. Yeah, one of those kind of next level, not mid-major, mid-ish, highest major type conferences.
Yeah.
And so now what you're kind of working with here is you have Kelvin, with him, his teams have kind of risen to the occasion and played incredibly well. And it's going to be interesting to see what he does to the rest of the conference now that Texas and Oklahoma are out.
Right.
I mean, that makes life a little easier with Texas not staring you in the face.
And also from a recruiting standpoint, I mean, it's kind of interesting now that, you wonder how much things have kind of opened for him now that, with the conference like switch over and all that, and obviously going the final, the national final helps, but it's interesting to me, like, did things open up for him a little bit now that things have changed and maybe Houston's got some, impressive NIL, but also just, is he kind of in that screw it mode of his career where it's like, I can keep grinding at this. I got really close. I was within a possession of hanging a banner, but let me just try this one thing. Let me just, I can get some 5-star kids now. Well, let's see if the experiment works.
And Houston probably has some money. Just throwing it out there.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I having traveled down there to see my brother. Yeah. The greater Houston area, which seems like the size of Massachusetts, has a little bit of cash lying around here and there. Just FYI.
And the Houston Cougars have always been a very popular. I mean, it's kind of like they're living life like it's 1984 again, aren't they? I mean, there's a little bit of that element in the town, even though they still have. It's one of the largest cities in America. I think 4th largest, is it? 4th largest city in America.
Past Chicago at some point.
They will, yes, they will do that. No. But yeah, I mean, even though they have the Astros, they have the Rockets, even though they have, the Texans down there, you still have a civic pride towards the University of Houston. Yeah. That they kind of, and even though you have a lot of them down there that are throwing money towards A&M, Texas, UT, SMU in some cases, you have all the massive Texas military collegiate complex, whatever they call that down there, you still have a lot of civic pride to that program. So that being said, I think it's gonna be interesting. I think that's another team. I think their ceiling's higher, but I do think that they're another team that with that floor, they're going to be, it's interesting to watch how they kind of, as you said, okay, just roll the dice and see if we can get it with some more talent.
Yeah.
So speaking of rolling the dice, 3 programs that now have their coach in a second year in Michigan, Kentucky, and Louisville. How would you describe, let's start with Michigan. How would you describe Michigan? What did they do?
Well, they probably had maybe the best portal season of anybody in terms of bringing in guys that will probably start. They brought in 3 starters, and 3 really good starters. You could probably argue maybe they brought in 4 altogether, but it just kind of depends on whether it's like some guys can be displaced or not. But so they brought in Eli Cadeau from Carolina, Eddie Mara from UCLA. IU fans may remember Mara. He was the huge starting center from UCLA last year. So he's transferring within conference. Also transferring within the conference, whereas Johnson from Illinois, he was basically the Illinois big last year. So apparently, we'll get to Illinois in a second, but there are 2 Ivisic brothers now, with one transferring in from Arkansas. So I guess Johnson decided that, well, one Ivisic brother was enough to stay on the roster, but 2 is one Ivisic brothers too many to stay at Illinois. So he just decided to bolt within the conference to Ann Arbor. So, and yeah, the last one is probably the most impressive get is Yaxel Lenneborg from UAB. Probably, if Braden Smith doesn't win the Big Ten Player of the Year, one person you might want to think putting your money on is Lenneborg. He's really impressive.
I was watching him. He's just so fluid. He
is. He's just he's a great defender. 6'8". He's basically, I guess you'd call him, a traditional power forward in a way. But man, he's something, and he would probably be like a top. He'll be a lottery pick, for sure. The thing about Michigan that's like interesting is that you think about last year, they were a really good team. They were an interesting team in the sense that basically their 4 was a 1. Danny Wolf was a power forward that basically had to play the one, basically take over the point guard position, because I just don't think that Donaldson was giving them exactly what they wanted. And so now you actually have a point guard situation in Michigan where they can actually kind of return to something a little bit more traditional. And of course, I was joking with another friend who's kind of like follows Michigan. I said, the Samuel Beckett joke is right there. Literally, Michigan was waiting for Cadeau to actually have a normal roster going into this coming year. Elliot Cadeau is actually going to be a great, I think, addition to them, because
he is.
I think it's going to free up a lot of things where Danny Wolf had to basically kind of be everything. He had to kind of he had to go and have like rebounding responsibility when the other team would cut off Golden. And he had to basically play point guard. And sometimes he had to kind of play 2 guard. I think Michigan's backcourt was a problem last year. And now I think, adding Cadeau, I think is going to really like change things up for them. I mean, they still have some of their guys like from last. I mean, Nehemiah Burnett is still there. Roddy Gale's still there. I think those guys can like hit enough threes and kind of balance out things. But I think Michigan is a little more impressive this year, because I think they're going to be a little bit more. I guess they'll be a little bit more traditional in a sense, but I think it's going to sort of like free them up to have better role definitions and be a little bit more effective than last year.
Trey McKinney's coming in also. He was, I think, somebody that was on some of the IU recruiting radars at one point in time, wasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, he's a Michigan kid, 5-star point guard. He'll probably take over once Cadeau's gone. He'll probably get some minutes this year. But yeah, I think it was kind of like IU kind of kicked the tires, but it's like, okay, yeah, Michigan's going to put their they're going to put their Wolverine spikes into this kid, and so yeah, he's probably going to be staying.
So yeah, I mean, I think you hit kind of the nail on the head that the biggest concern, because with Michigan last year, was guard play, and in particular their ability to penetrate the ball with their guards. That was an issue that Donaldson had. Cadeau is always a question mark. I mean, because he had that opportunity, he had plenty. I think it never really panned out at Carolina, and now we're about to see he could either blow up. He could blow up in either direction, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I think he's pretty good.
He's good. I think.
But you're right. I think there's potential on either side of this. You're right.
There's a volatility to him, even with Yaxel a little bit also, because he's coming in from University of Alabama, Birmingham. You're just not sure. Now, the backtrack to this is Dusty May is pretty good at his job and pretty good at schematically getting his guys where he needs to get them. I mean, he turned that Michigan team became a winning team pretty quickly last year.
Right.
But I do think, I'm not saying there's any doubt here. I'm saying that there may be more, like you say, Purdue has a very fixed floor. Michigan may not, but they also may have a higher ceiling than what you're seeing, even though they're seeing 3 in Torvik right now in preseasons.
Right.
This could be incredibly, incredibly good or decent, which might be disappointing to some Wolverine fans. Right. And decent is you're just sneaking into maybe a 5 seed. You know what I'm trying to say? Like a 5.
Right, yeah.
Like if you think about 2/3 of your games are determined within 10 points of each other, roughly. 2/3 of your conference games are within 10 points, which is basically 5 possessions. Are you going to be better than you were last year? More than likely, yes. But there's also a chance with this sort of volatility with these types of personalities in this sort of area that it may not go the way you think it's going to go at times.
Yeah, I think if one of Burnett and Gale live up to their potential and start really kind of like bowling out the way I think they thought they would when they brought them in, then yeah, Michigan will be in good shape. Also assuming that, the rest of the guys, fall in line, the big additions from the portal.
Right. And I mean, just as a thing, Gale last year was 23% from three. Burnett was 40%. Yeah. So, I mean, the question with Roddy Gale is going to be, can Roddy get his groove back from the perimeter?
Yeah.
Although he only had it that freshman year on only 49 attempts. So
but he was a top 50 recruit, into Ohio State. So he's,
yeah.
I mean, he has the ceiling, I think.
Briefly Kentucky, and then very briefly Louisville. Kentucky had some major upgrades too, I thought.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, if you believe like the internet rumors, they have, apparently the same salary budget as the LA Lakers in terms of, what they can spend. I don't think that's actually true, but it is.
I don't think so either.
It is written. It must be true. Yeah. So yeah, the additions they had, they brought in Lowe from Pitt and Aberdeen from Florida from the championship team. That will basically be their backcourt, I think. Adding on to the most important returning player they have is their wing, Oteg the kid from Oklahoma, he had a really good year last year. So it's obviously big that the Cats got him back. I think that the one big downturn that they had is the biggest portal ad they had. Jaden Quinton's from Arizona State, who would be their 4, had an injury, and he's kind of being held out right now. They think he's going to come back sometime this year. Haven't really heard any update. Last I checked like a week or two ago, I think they still said like, well, it's still going to be out maybe a few weeks, maybe a few months. We probably have to talk to our pal at Everything College Basketball to get an update on that at some point. So
I have a feeling that we're going to have Josh back on here in about a month or so to kind of go back to the rekindling of the rivalry. That may be a good conversation for us to have, because it's time that we actually find, people are saying, to people in the Back Home Network, who are your rivals? I mean, he's not a rival, he's a friend, but we do want to have some conversations here.
Yeah.
And speaking of another, again, potential rivalry, is that Louisville made some moves that kind of put them back in position to, they're starting the season off better. And there's 2 names that we love, Isaac McNeely and Ryan Conwell.
Yeah,
that
two
are
former IU targets at one point.
Yes, 2 former IU targets, and you're kind of thinking here that Pat Kelsey's got kind of the ability to kind of do what he, to be able to be better this year than he was last year in many respects.
I will say this, and this is one of those bets we can always like look back on. I bet that Louisville will be maybe, if not the best, one of the best 3-point shooting teams in the country. And they have the potential to like set records this year. The amount of 3-point shooting talent they've brought in is utterly ridiculous. I mean, Conwell and McNeely both are, if you had to do like top 5 shooters in the country, those 2 guys would absolutely be in there. Luckily, IU got one of the other ones, which would be Lamar Wilkerson. But if you talk about like guys in terms of their metrics, I mean, Conwell and McNeely are ridiculous. Both like, 98, 90 percentile shooters. In addition to, they also brought Adrian Woolley from Kennesaw State. He's also a ridiculous 3-point shooter. He was conference freshman of the year when he was at KSU. Obviously, like the one headliner that's like an interesting addition is Mikael Brown, the 5-star recruit that Louisville brought in. He's probably going to be their point guard. And he's a good shooter too. I mean, he's an all-around, he can penetrate, pass, but he's also a really good shooter for like a 1. So yeah, that's the one thing I'd be watching for Louisville. Like that team may be absolutely ridiculous in terms of their shooting capacity going into this coming year.
Give you an idea on Pat Kelsey over the years with 3-point attempts. He's only been only been outside the top 100 twice in the country since 2013. Last year, Louisville was shooting had a 3-point attempt on 47.8% of their attempts were a 3-point shot.
Yeah.
So, to Mike's point, to your point, Mike, that's definitely there.
Yeah.
We're gonna briefly go through the Big Ten, and let's just talk Illinois for just a moment because we talk because they've gone on a very interesting way of kind of accumulating talent.
Yeah, it's like they become almost like the Belgrade of the Corn Belt in terms of how they're going about like bringing kids in. Yeah, a lot of the Balkan kids that they brought in are really impressive. I mean, like literally some parts, like literally it's just like they took part of the Croatian national team and part of the Serbian national team and just like, threw them in there. We talked about before, like, now they have 2 Ivisic brothers. So IU's already seen one Ivisic brother. Now they have 2. And basically they kind of are the same player. They're both 7'1", and they're both great in terms of just like, sort of like ball skills, and they shoot threes at a pretty decent percent. So it's very hard to deal with those guys, especially if they're like popping out and clearing out the lane. They also have Mihailo Petrovic he's the sort of like the Serbian kid they brought in. I say kid, he's a 22-year-old freshman because he's been in the Serbian National League for a little while. But probably and IU fans will probably remember from last year. I mean, the 2 main returnees are Ben Hummerkaus and Kyle Boswell. So that'll be their 4 and their 1. Probably the most impressive guy bringing in is Andrej Stojakovic. We were talking about Peja action earlier. Well, this is Peja's son.
They named it after his old man.
Named it after his old man. Yeah, this is Peja Stojakovic's son, and Andre is coming from Cal. And again, another kid that IU recruited pretty heavily when he was coming out of high school.
Yeah,
he's going to be a handful. That guy, he's just great at penetrating. He's got good handle. He can hit shots from pretty much any part, and he finishes very well. That's the problem. Like, he can get to the line, and there's a lot of and ones coming out of that kid. So again, just like his dad, crazy skill set, probably will be playing in the NBA. And the thing that's a little bit different about him, because you see, like, Illinois has obviously had some of these additions that have been coming that are great FIBA players that are coming from overseas. The tough thing is that some of them are basically coming in as freshmen. And so you don't quite have the experience. And you remember, like, last year with the point guard that they had, who was already in the NBA again, he had some great highs and also great lows. Unfortunately, at Assembly Hall, he had a high game that night in terms of just like absolutely bombardiering IU all night. But with Stojakovic, I think you're going to get a lot more like steady, consistent, high-end play from him just because of his experience. And I think that's the one element I think is going to make Illinois dangerous. I think they're going to score a lot of points, but I think that Stojakovic, I think, is going to like stabilize them in terms of their output.
Well, and I mean, you also have guys coming out of the training system over there. These guys have received high-level training, and you're dealing with men. And it's going to be interesting to see kind of how basically how Underwood deals with that, how Brad Underwood deals with that issue. Yeah. That you're now coaching a bunch of guys who it's almost like you're now a AAA coach. You always are kind of in the college game, but it's like going to be less about, how do you handle, 18, 19-year-old kids versus 22-year-old young men.
Yeah.
Who have been on the road, who have seen things, who have done things, who are parts of things, who, kind of have that, and just even the cult, from building a team culture, in these types of circumstances. Underwood, I think it's going to be a test for him in just trying to bring the chemistry, but again, putting things together, the chemistry together. It's going to be, I think, a big challenge moving them into that direction.
Right.
I would say. they may they may be fine on the court, or it's also he'll be good at getting them in the right roles and the right sort of areas and responsibilities. But that's a team to definitely watch out for, and one that I think you're going to see more programs. And IU's kind of doing this too, where we're sending Drew Adams on a plane over to the former Yugoslavia, doing the Marshall Tito recruitment campaign, where we're trying to get more partisans to come overseas. More the Randolph Churchill would be the better historical for those of you nerds at home that are familiar with the Yugoslavian partisan campaign. If you haven't looked it up on YouTube, look it up, or on the internets, look that up. Learn a little bit about this.
We are basically a history podcast that occasionally talks basketball.
Talk about basketball every once in a while.
Yeah.
So two more programs of note. I think I'm going to skip Maryland, honestly, even though Buzz Williams coming in, because I think it's just a different scenario. But I think with Iowa and Minnesota, with Darian DeVries coming into Indiana, McCollum going into Iowa, there's going to be a Drake. And when you're here on the 17th, we're going to be hearing that Drake boys battle, the battle of the Drake boys.
Yeah.
And then Nico Medvedev coming in from Colorado State, who's one of the best offensive minds in the country, we think, moving into Minnesota. Well, it's going to be interesting to see how the impact that those guys have on the conference.
Yeah, well, you think about that game we're going to see in January, the IU Iowa game. That's basically going to be the Drake 2024 inter-squad team versus the 2025 Drake inter-squad team.
So it is.
I think there's going to be, are there 7 former Drake players on both teams combined, I think?
Yeah, well, you have obviously Tucker DeVries and Connor Enright for IU, and I think when you bring McCollum to your program, he brings his team, a Division II national champion, I might add.
Yeah. I mean, they have Sturts, Banks, Manuel's there, and then I think 1 or 2 other bench players came over. So I think IU has 2, and they have 5, I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you're
basically seven kids from one school playing against each other at 2 new schools.
It's a testament to what they built there, and a testament also really what Darian DeVries built there is really is my main takeaway from it. And then what McCollum brought in for that 1 year, where they were one of the better teams in the country in so many ways, which kind of got him an instant promotion. Yeah. But
we're going to feel bad for Tony Adrania when he's watching that, because we know that there's going to be some bit of sorrow in watching Ben McCollum coach, and it's not on the Clemson side.
I think upon further review, it was one of those things where I don't think anybody, and let's just go back to where we were 6 months ago. I don't think anybody thought Darian DeVries would leave West Virginia after a year.
No, he wasn't on the radar at that time.
Wasn't on the radar. And the fact that we landed him and getting him in this situation, I think, was right up the alley. He's exactly what this fan base needed. McCollum just seemed like, if you're looking for the next, what we thought would be the next Cignetti, he made sense.
Yeah, or the next Bo Run in,
but
the multiple-time national champion from the lower division that
right,
kind of breaks through and has a unique kind of approach to coaching. Yeah, you're kind of hoping for that unicorn sort of scenario.
Yeah, and I mean, we may have actually found a Pegasus instead, which is just fine. I mean, they're both just equally as rare. Yeah. But I would also throw in that that's one worth watching. Also watching Nico Medvedev this year at Minnesota, seeing how he tries to retool it up there. Yeah. I think it's going to be a different style of basketball than Minnesota's ever seen, honestly.
Well, I mean, it's going to be interesting because if you think about it, Nico runs very offensive-minded basketball. It's not necessarily fast, but it's very efficient. He tries to do, gets shooters, and it's a little bit more of a Western style because he was at Colorado State, the last few years. And I mean, it's fun basketball. Now, in contrast, the coach they just let go, Ben Johnson, if you look at a lot of his writings and his speeches about basketball, it is almost impossible for him to talk about unless he's referencing wrestling as a metaphor. So you go from, and again, we have the joke about Big Ten being a tackle basketball league. Well, his was already a body slam version of basketball, where he was constantly, and you could hear him from the sidelines So the stuff he was saying is like, is he like Vince McMahon? Like, what's going on over there?
Mm-hmm.
And now you're bringing in like, someone like Nico, who's definitely,
finesse,
much more into modern offense and things.
It's
like
finesse.
That.
It's
totally.
Finesse.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it.
And I think if we look at Minnesota again, it's what I do think I like the stylistic differentiations. By the way, on their 10 on I just looked at in Torvik, they don't have anybody over 6'8".
Yeah.
They got I got several guys at 6'8", 6'7", but you can definitely tell, I think, that programs are looking for what they can do to shake the conference up away from the Painter Izzo model. Bo Ryan. And Bo's been gone now a decade, right? Or close to it.
Yeah, well, and now even Greg Gard is like modernizing Wisconsin basketball,
trying to get them where they're actually, not trying to grind it down to a exhaustive hold. McCollum, you can argue, tries to grind it down with 59, 60 possessions a game.
Yeah.
But the question, I just think it's a different type of grind than what you saw with the others, where it was just it's more of an intellectual grind than a physical grind with McCollum.
Yeah. Well, you watched, they haven't played a game yet. I was watching some game film or some of their pickup game, the inter squad game that they were like running. And it looked like kind of like typical Ben McCollum. But one thing you notice, like they don't get shots off quickly, but they're constantly moving. There's a lot of like, they're doing ball screen action, but they're doing a lot of like, back cutting, they're constantly looking to, like the rule is if their head's turned, you cut kind of thing.
Right.
So yeah, it's that kind of stuff. So they're fast, but they're just not like fast necessarily in terms of getting the shot up. I'm kind of interested in, obviously, they're bringing back Bennett Sturtz as their, their best player, who's like, the stud from Drake that kind of, carried them through March last year. They also have, what's this? Alvaro Fulgaras from Robert Morris, who is the Northeast Conference Player of the Year. He's their big, he's like he'll probably be their 4 because Manuel is probably their 5. But Fulgaras is really interesting. He's like, again, another really like skilled 4 that can kind of like step out and do guard kind of things. And he's another one to kind of keep an eye on because he's going to be a hard guy to defend with most traditional 4s. So yeah, I think Iowa's going to be interesting. I'm still curious. This is what we debated when we were considering McCollum is he going to be as slow at the next level as he was at Drake? Because again, last year at Drake, they were literally the slowest team in terms of adjusted tempo in all of Division I basketball.
Well, it's your theory of opposites again. Because Fran McCaffrey played at such a high pace of play.
Exactly.
And his defensive principles are definitely different. The ball press concepts and the multiple changing of defenses by Fran McCaffrey is different than what you're going to see from Ben McCollum. I don't think you can get 2 men further apart from each other in so many different ways. I don't think we're going to have a McCollum con. A meme to just kind of say, okay, BenCon 3, he's BenCon 3 looks a lot like BenCon 5, looks a lot like BenCon 1. Oh Jesus, that eyebrow raised. He's intense. He's just intense in a different way. They also kept Cooper Cook. I just want to say that real quick as well, that Cooper decided to stick around and and go through the change also. Yeah. So it's going to be, I think, again, it's one of those, the narrative coming out when you talk about the PR narrative kind of going into this is that these 3 men are going to be kind of compared against each other this year.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a question of who do they try to pick off? If you're Nico Medvedev, you're looking up at a Northwestern. You're looking at a Rutgers. Can you jump those guys?
Yeah.
If you're McCollum and DeVries, you're looking, can you get into that top 4 or even top 8 of the conference again? Yeah. If you're McCollum, I think top 8, top 6. If you're DeVries, you're looking, can you get into that top 6?
Yeah.
So it's a can you break out of that middle of the pack, which we know exists in the Big Ten, which is from 12-8 to 8-12, you have 14 of the 18 teams. It seems like every year.
Right.
So it's, or 12. And now 4 on the top, 4 on the bottom, everybody else in the middle. So can you kind of overproduce, or at the very least get, do better than your predecessor did, and be more consistent in those areas.
Right.
And so with that, you have guys with translatable skills. You have guys that are shooting the ball well. I think a lot of these teams have definitely prioritized. I think taking Purdue out of the equation, I think all the programs we talked about have prioritized shooting. Would you agree?
Right. Yeah. Well, Purdue already had shooting anyway.
That's my point. Yeah.
But yeah, the other ones have all like really just gassed up, on 3-point shooting, and Louisville, is just gone completely hog wild with shooting. So it's I think that's just where the sport is going overall. It's always been going there. It's just I think it's accelerating. So
the question with Louisville, is it a Buick at Indianapolis or is it a Penske? We just don't know. On that note, so when we come back on X's and Joe's, we're going to wrap this thing up and talk about coming attractions.
Final buzzer sounds in Bloomington. The conversation starts here. The assembly call is IU basketball. Live post-game shows, smart midweek breakdowns, and no empty hot takes. Jared Morris, Coach Brian Tonsoni, Andy Bottoms, and Ryan Phillips dissect lineups, sets, and recruiting so you know what really happened and what it means for the Big Ten season, March, and beyond. Join the live chat on YouTube, then catch the podcast on Spotify and Apple. Just search Assembly Call and be part of Hoosier Nation's most trusted post-game tradition.
Welcome back to X's and Joe's. I'm Mike Wiemuth, joined by Coach Bob Moats. So, Bob, all this stuff with all the changes and everything going on, and all the moving back and forth between the teams and the portal, it's clear as mud, isn't it?
It is. And this is, I think, what makes this so much fun, because we really have no idea. Like when we were kind of talking about this show, and originally this show was designed to say, okay, what are traits coaches are looking for in mid-major players? And we realized we could do this with a preseason preview. And if you're picking up on the most translatable skills, it's putting the ball in the basket in many respects. Like getting bigs to be able to bang down there is not what we're looking at here in many respects. But I think the clarity issue, it's going to be a question for so many programs as to, can you get this group to play together quickly and effectively and efficiently? Yeah. And your learning curve is 3 weeks, and then you're into feast week. And if you're IU, your second game is Marquette, which you're playing in a neutral site. So you got those games back. You got Louisville staring you down. You got Kentucky staring you down, just in December, which are resume building games. You can lose those games still build your resume using them. Right. And I think that's the other question. Like, what makes this so unclear is it's not just about a win-loss record, which is important. It's essential. But it is about, are you winning effectively enough in your bye games? And when you're losing, are you beating the predictor? Because if you can beat predictors on both of those areas, you can start seeing rising in the metrics, which I think helps you build momentum going into your conference season.
Right.
You have good performances before Christmas if you're Indiana, or for that matter, Iowa or Minnesota with new coaches. If Michigan starts off and they're still maintaining themselves in top 5 of KenPom, top 5 of Torvik, same with Purdue, there's a good chance they're going to hang around there for a while, because they've built enough of a base in their resume to make that happen, which is where the clarity becomes so hard to see, because the question is, you only have so many, the top 2%, there's only 8 spots.
Right.
And you got a bunch of teams that look like they could go in there. Mm-hmm. I mean, look at the top 30 in KenPom right now and ask yourself, how many of these teams are actually 1 or 2 seeds? And the number, you can make a case for a lot of those programs.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. And it's interesting, I think, that when we kind of look, and this is also happening, I think, in college football too, is just that because of the way the portal is operating, it's flattening out the sort of like mountaintop of both sports, where it's like you don't it's like years ago, let's say like in college football, college basketball, where there's like one, maybe two teams you look at, it's like, oh yeah, they're going to win it. Like, I don't see like anything possibly happening outside of like, those two teams, particularly like, in like college football. But I think even basketball, there was just like much more of a sort of a Hillary step, so to say, in the Everest climb compared to where it is today. Now with things being kind of flattened, just because, again, teams can poach players from other teams. There's a lot more cross poaching right now that's like happening at an increasing rate within college basketball. This is something that, you and I talked about this before, but I was doing some analysis about like, where are the best, like the top 50 players in college basketball every year? Where are they coming from? Are they homegrown recruits, or are they transfers? Are they elite kids? Whatever. Like in 2023, like 29% of the players in the top 50, let's say, like in in their box plus minus and all that, 29% of the transfers that took place within the top 50 were from big schools, and 71% were from the smaller schools. So again, it's like, almost like 3-1 in favor of the small schools. Today, just 3 years later, it's basically flipped. Now it's basically 3-1 big school to small school. So what's basically happening now is that at the top level of college basketball, within like, the pool for the best players, you're getting much more poaching coming across from big school against big school. So you're seeing a lot more like Hunter Dickinson kind of scenarios, and less Dalton Connect kind of scenarios. Again, they're both happening, in terms of volume. They're still taking place. It's just at the top part of echelon of college basketball, you're just getting a lot more big schools going against big schools in terms of their, competing for roster spots, which kind of creates like an interesting question about like, is this going to be like the NBA, or are just going to be open salary negotiations at the end of every year? Hey, I want to go to school X. They're offering me like 10% more. Does the coach say, okay, we'll give you that extra $2-3 million. Oh crap. That's the $2-3 million we're hoping to use on the big recruit they were looking at next year, or the portal player that we're hoping to target. So it gets interesting. And like I said, it gets very muddy in terms of like what we're used to, and discussing just the basic X's and O's of college basketball.
Well, and ultimately that's a great way to look at it, because it's now a question of at what point did bubbles pop? And that's really the question. Like if you're hearing 22 million at Kentucky, well, then the question becomes, when does the football program say, what their coach? Mark Stoops is their coach, right? Is that who I'm thinking? Am I got their coach right for their football program?
I think he's on his last legs, but yes.
The Texas game, watching the play calling at the end was enough to, what are we doing?
That was sicko committee. That was the sickos committee.
So what do if football's bringing in your revenue, and the SEC wants you to bring in football revenue, and not only that, but you're going to have to put more investment in there. It's a question of, at some point, as Everett Dirksen, the great senator from Illinois, once said, a few million here, a few million there, and sooner or later you're talking about real money.
Yeah.
This isn't an inexhaustible pot of horse farm money that you can just dip into. Nor is it oil money, nor is it Walmart money, nor is it money out of, the quarries of Indiana. Not
even SMU football money in the 1980s.
Not even that. And the biggest problem that we've had with the NIL/player compensation era is now decimal points don't matter. It's commas. Like if you think about what the price of players was 10 years ago versus today, you had to launder money 10 years ago. Today, you just basically, you get a 1099. And there's a differentiation that once you kind of throw that more open and you allow for negotiation, actual negotiation, that isn't done by a driver's ed teacher and two guys named Louie in the back alley, which is what I think college sports was for so long. Yeah. That now you actually have this real formalized process, and it's like, wait a minute, this is costing us real cash. And if you're operating like Ohio State, under the old rules of, hey, it's just free money. Just throw it out there. The TV guys will give us more. It's like, no, you're at some point you're going to have the economic limits that kick in. So the question then becomes, what does a national championship starting line 5 look like from a price point? What does your key 8 look like? So how much, if you're talking a $12 to $15 million investment in college basketball for a program to be contending, your key 8 is going to have to look a certain way. So how much of your 12 to 15 are you, and what's between 12 and 15 million? $3 million, which is not a small sum of money by any stretch of the imagination.
Right.
If you put that extra, is getting that extra 2-3 million going to get you over the top? And at some point also it's a question of, okay, so you can buy all that talent, but as we found with the New York Yankees in the 80s, it doesn't always work. Like, you can have baseball's biggest payroll and still be lousy. So same thing's true in basketball, same thing's true in football. That's why everybody's going to salary caps except baseball, because, well, they're nuts. But there's this whole process that needs to be kind of gamed out a little bit. What is it going to cost us? And I think donors are going to want to know that number too of, hey, at what point do we get a figure? At what point do you tell me this is what we need to make this work?
Yeah.
And it's now a question of, how do you spend that 12? And if you spend 10 of it on your key 6, you can do that. I think it's not a bad idea. But you could also spend, using a sweet spot model, you could spend 12 of the 15 on your key 8 and really just get a group that could actually perform where you don't really know who's going to hit the shot, but it's coming from somewhere.
Right.
And it's going to be effective.
Yeah. And you're seeing like just a little bit less predictable models of like teams, or at least like profiles of teams that are like getting to the Final Four championship. I mean, literally Florida this last year just defies all historical metrics in terms of like, kind of stuff that, you and I study, is that, that this is just not a team that like fits what we're like used to in terms of like, sweet spot and recruit rankings and all that stuff. So yeah, it's a little bit more open. It doesn't mean that like everyone should just go out and do what Florida does, because it's like, it's like Auburn fans saying, let's just do what Cignetti's doing, as if it's an easy button that everyone gets to press. So, so yeah, it is complicated, and you're right. It's a little bit just more of an open game now, and everyone's trying to figure out the rules.
So you're not telling me that every single player that comes out of Iona is not Walter Clayton Jr.?
Apparently not, though. You can always hope. You always cross your fingers and pray.
Duly noted. Hey, he came for the same program as this guy.
What's the problem? Why don't you like that kid?
He says, they're all the same, aren't they? They all came from the same school.
Yeah.
So coming attractions, we're gonna keep talking about this stuff. Again, kind of we'll be back in a couple weeks, probably after the first couple games of the season. Mike's side program at Baylor plays IU this Sunday. So just don't tell the Hoosier fans. We might get where you're going to be.
Just between you and me and like everyone watching this,
yeah. So, but we'll be talking. I think the Moneyball concept is going to kind of come back also, that as we learn more going into recruiting season, as well as the first couple of weeks, kind of getting a general idea as stuff starts to crystallize.
Yeah.
Other than that, Mike, we'll also have Bill on. We're going to be talking to Bill here soon too. So
yes, we're looking to have author and friend of many podcast, Bill Murphy, slated to join the show and talk a little bit of IU history. And we've been looking forward to that one for like a year now. So let's celebrate the fact that we're finally coming upon that.
Getting the tribute to the 60s we've so sorely needed. And just want to say thanks to Bob Thompson for the music and sound of the show, and special thanks to John Ringer of ringdesign.com for designing our logo and look of the show.
Yep. And this endless conversation was brought to you by the Back Home Network. Be sure to check out all the great BHN content, including Assembly Call, Doing the Work, Football Weather, Big Red Carpet, Sideline Stories, The Dribble Drive, and Crimson Cast on YouTube and on backhomenetwork.com. So until next time, I'm Mike Wiemuth.
I'm Bob Moats.
Take care, everybody.